Hi, this is Denise from Denise in Wonderland, a magical journey of faith through Christ. Today, we will sink deeper into God's Word and His truth. We have to chase the presence of God, and we can do so through His Word. Let's get started. Genesis chapters 28 and 29. Chapter 28. Isaac called Jacob, blessed him, and commanded him, "You shall not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father. Take a wife from there, from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be a company of peoples, and give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may inherit the land where you travel, which God gave to Abraham." Isaac sent Jacob away. He went to Padan Aram to Laban, son of Bethuel the Syrian, Rebekah's brother, Jacob's and Esau's mother. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he gave him a command, saying, "You shall not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan." And that Jacob obeyed his father and his mother, and was gone to Padan Aram. Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan didn't please Isaac his father. Isaac went to Ishmael. Esau went to Ishmael and took, besides the wives that he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth, to be his wife. Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there all night, because the sun had set. He took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head, and lay down in that place to sleep. He dreamed, behold, a stairway set upon the earth, and its top reached to heaven. Behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Behold, Yahweh stood above it and said, "I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereon you lie, to you will I give it, and to your offspring. Your offspring will be as the dust of the earth, and you will spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. In you and in your offspring will all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you again into this land. For I will not leave you until I have done that which I have spoken of to you." Jacob awakened out of his sleep, and he said, "Surely Yahweh is in this place, and I didn't know it." He was afraid and said, "How dreadful is this place! This is none other than God's house, and this is the gate of heaven." Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on its top. He called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first. Jacob vowed a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, and Yahweh will be my God, then this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, will be God's house. Of all that you will give me, I will surely give a tenth to you." Chapter 29. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the children of the east. He looked, and behold, a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying there by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. The stone on the well's mouth was large. There all the flocks were gathered. They rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the sheep, and put the stone again on the well's mouth in its place. Jacob said to them, "My relatives, where are you from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well. See, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still the middle of the day, not time to gather the livestock together. Water the sheep and go feed them." They said, "We can't until all the flocks are gathered together." And they rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. While he was yet speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. When Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother and that he was Rebekah's son. She ran and told her father. When Laban heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet Jacob and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things. Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." He lived with him for a month. Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my brother, you therefore serve me for nothing. Tell me, what will your wages be?" Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and attractive. Jacob loved Rachel. He said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me." Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. They seemed to him but a few days for the love he had for her. Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in to her." Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. In the evening he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him. He went in to her. Laban gave Zilpah his servant to his daughter Leah for a servant. In the morning, behold, it was Leah. He said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Didn't I serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not done so in our place, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill the week of this one, and we will give you the other also for the service which you will serve with me yet 7 other years." Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. He gave him Rachel his daughter as wife. Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his servant, to be her servant. He went in also to Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. Yahweh saw that Leah was hated, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben, for she said, "Because Yahweh has looked at my affliction, for now my husband will love me." She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because Yahweh has heard that I am hated, he has therefore given me this son also." She named him Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, said, "Now this time will my husband be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. She conceived again and bore a son. She said, "This time will I praise Yahweh." Therefore she named him Judah. Then she stopped bearing. Okay. So I will go ahead and warn you, I actually really think this part of the Bible is so interesting, because we're going to see a lot of back and forth. But we see here, sorry, looking at my notes. But we've got, let's go all the way back to chapter 28. And so this is when we've got Isaac telling his son Jacob, "Hey, you need to go to Padan Haram, where my family is, and go find yourself a wife." Because in the previous chapter on 27 in verse 46, Rebecca said to Isaac, "Hey, we're surrounded by these foreign women, and I'm just concerned because if Jacob takes a wife, what kind of life am I going to have?" She's like, "We need to find some different women. We need to find him a better wife." And so it's interesting that this is kind of what Abraham did for his son Isaac. And so Isaac is now doing this for his son Jacob, where he's, instead of sending the servant, he is actually sending Jacob himself to go and find a wife. And he tells him exactly where he needs to go get her. But what's interesting is that when Jacob leaves, Esau catches wind of what the father has said, what his father has said to his brother. And he realizes, my father hates the foreign women and does not want his sons to marry these women. And so what's interesting is he does exactly that because of that. And so he goes and finds a wife. It looks like a daughter of Ishmael. And yes, a daughter of Ishmael. And her name is Mahalath. And it's interesting that he does this because it's almost as if Esau wants to inflict some kind of pain on his father. And it's strange because the person who deceived him was not the father. It was Jacob. It was Jacob and Rebekah who did it, who deceived him. But we're seeing here, this is what happens. This has been invited that now Esau is very upset. And so he actually does something that really could be harmful to him, even though he's doing it as a way to get back at his parents. And this is one of the things we have to be cautious of, is sometimes we will go do something just because someone doesn't like it. And that's not a good way to live life. We don't want to do that, because the foreign women are not of that land, do not know Yahweh. So Esau, obviously, he's aware because of his father and his grandfather. But one could make the argument that if he only marries foreign women who do not know Yahweh, who actually probably participate in idol worship of some sort, he is actually condemning himself to living a life surrounded by this idol worship and surrounding himself with a life that is not going to include the presence of God. So he is, in essence, making sure that the blessing only goes to his brother and not to himself, because he's not going to allow Yahweh to be in his presence. He's not going to live with Yahweh being his God. He cannot, if he is so gung-ho on doing everything that basically displeases his father. But let's go ahead and move on. We have Esau, I keep mixing them up. Esau that leaves. And in verse 26, actually, that's a little too far ahead. In verse 6, there's a dream that falls upon Jacob. And when he sleeps, he sees a ladder, and he sees the angels of God going up and down upon the earth. Now, this is symbolic. God is allowing Jacob to see that God is not disconnected from what happens on earth. He's not this absentee God who's just looking from far above. God actually is very involved in what happens here on earth, and he is present here. And when Jacob wakes, he's actually fearful, and he says in verse 16, "Surely Yahweh is in this place, and I didn't know it." And that line, because there's a song, I don't know what it's called, but there's a song that refers to the Lord is in this place. And sometimes I don't think we always remember that the Lord is in this place. And then he becomes fearful. And I wonder if he became fearful because you're supposed to become fearful when you believe that God is present somewhere because of his holiness and because he's God. And I wonder if Jacob was fearful because he had did this great deception and this, that, and the other. And so I'm wondering if he was fearful, just kind of his soul and spirit, just kind of grieving his sinful behavior and just humbling himself because he's in the presence of the most holy being in the universe. And that may have been part of his fearfulness, but gosh, we should always say, surely Yahweh is in this place and I didn't know it. How different will we live our lives if we thought that Yahweh was like here? And when I say here, I mean just say, oh, well, yeah, God is on earth. No, I mean, if you truly believe that Yahweh is sitting in the house with you, how would your life change? If you truly believe that Yahweh was with you when you were in the car, how different would you behave? If you truly believe that Yahweh was with you, how different would we act when we felt like we were being challenged by God to go down a particular road of life? If God challenged us to leave a particular person or challenged us to take a new job in another state, we get so fearful. But are we fearful because we don't believe that God is surely in this place with you? That's going to be, even though we still got to go through chapter 29, that is going to be the thing that I really want us to try to focus on is ask yourself that question. Do you believe that God is in this place with you? Do you believe that he walks with you? Because if you start, when we have those moments of fear, or when we have those moments where we want to commit a poor a poor a poor decision, as Jacob did, did this deception occur because he didn't believe that God was there? Because if you believe that Yahweh was there, you wouldn't dare, number one. And number two, you would know that God has it handled because he's physically there. So what's there to worry about? But we've got to claim that God is in this place. See, God already knows where he is. The question is, how do we really understand it in our spirit, and do we remember? And maybe we need to visualize the same image that Jacob did. See, God gave Jacob an insight into the spiritual world so he could see what was happening. And if you notice, he was dreaming when this happened. And this is important because, see, our physical eyes, those eyes that are open when we're awake, sometimes does not capture reality. And it's important to know that just because we see something doesn't mean it is that way. Because the things that we see with our eyes is just a small fraction of what's actually happening. God himself does things in the earth that cannot be seen with human eyes. They must be seen with the inner eyes, the eyes of faith, the spiritual eyes. And this is a spiritual concept that God is in this place. And what Jacob does, which is very important, because of something that he learned with spiritual eyes, he then in verse, he makes a vow. And then in verse 18, it's when he takes a stone, he sets up a pillar, he pours oil on it. And so he basically creates something so that way he can remember physically with his eyes. And think about that. There are things that we probably need to do here on earth to remember with our physical eyes what is happening that we cannot see with our spiritual eyes. So basically, we have to find a way to build altars to God here. Now, I don't mean go in to get stones, okay? But what I mean is you've got to determine a way that you remember that God is here. One of the things you can remember is remembering the cross. See, the cross is something we can visualize like that. If you remember the cross, you can be confident that God is in this place. God is in this place because you know that God would not have let his son die on a cross and say that he died for us, for God just not to be here for us. If you have accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, there is no way that God is going to allow his son to pay that ultimate price and not be here for you. You were bought. We were bought at a price that was astronomical. So there's no way that God is not going to protect his investment. He's going to be here with us because we have been purchased. We are his treasured possessions. So God is always in this place. So that is what we need to visualize. We got to visualize the cross. The cross is our altar. That is where we worship from. We worship and we praise God for the work that he did on that cross, the work he did before that cross, and the work he continues to do today. And so we've got to visualize it and remember that he is here. It will change our lives. The more we realize that he is here with us, it will change how we act. It will change our faith. It will transform us from the inside out, because it'll make us become more honorable people, and it'll make us condemn every time we begin to sin. We'll condemn it more often. We won't wait so long. The moment that we do something, we will immediately get down our knees and say, God, I am so sorry I did this in your presence. I'm sorry I forced you to witness this, because you are holy. We need to be fearful of knowing it's that healthy fear. See, the Bible talks about having a fear of God. We have to have that fear where we fear trespassing on his holiness. So remember, your God walks with you. But let's go on. We've got Genesis. Let's talk briefly about the oath before we go to Genesis 29. So Jacob makes an oath because after this vision, after God has shown him that he's with him always, but Jacob makes an oath, and he basically tells him, "Hey, I trust you, God, because I know you will always be with me." And then he talks about how he trusts that God will always clothe him and keep him fed. So he's acknowledging that God will always take care of his physical needs. And then he mentions towards the end how he will make sure that a tenth of all that he receives from God, he will actually return to God, because he's showing God, I understand that this comes from you in the first place, and I'm just going to give you back some of it, because this is just my way of thanking you, because it's all yours. And so this marks how Jacob is now becoming a new man. This is a man that is different from the man we saw before when he was deceiving his father. But you see how overnight, how just the awareness of being in the presence of God, how it can literally change you overnight. So now we're going to go to Genesis 29. So we've got 29 where Jacob actually goes out to go to Padan Haran to go find the wife. And so he goes to this region, and he comes across some of his relatives, and he's like, "Hey, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" And Laban is actually his uncle. So that he is the brother of Rebecca. And they're like, "Hey, we know him." And they're like, "He's doing well." And they're like, "Look, that's his daughter who's coming with the sheep." And then Jacob tries to be a little slick because he sees Rachel coming. He's like, it's the middle of the day. It's not the time to gather lifestyle. He's basically trying to shoo these people on so he can have a little private discussion with Rachel. But they're like, "We got to stay here." And they got to stay here because they talk about a stone. And if you want to know what that's about, they had stones they would keep on top of wells because they would reserve this water for their sheep. And so they were heavy stones. It kind of kept it reserved just for their use. And so it was just a way of maintaining and reserving your water for the sheep. And I love that there's actually some spiritual parallels to this, that God also maintains and reserves our blessings likewise for us as well, because we're his flock. So anytime I see things about sheep, I start to perk up a little bit in the Bible. But anyways, so what ends up happening here is, if you jump down to we've got verse 13 where Laban hears the news of Jacob, and he meets him. And so then Jacob just informs him, "Hey, I'd like to marry Rachel." And so he says, "Oh," he's like, "Yeah," he said, "I definitely should give her to you because, I'd rather you marry her than some other dude." And so he's like, "So stay with me." And he's like, and so Jacob actually tells him, "Hey, I'll work for you for 7 years." So he works the 7 years. And then what ends up happening is Jacob ends up on the receiving end of deception. So even though Jacob is trying to do the right thing now, some of what he did is now coming back to him. So, and I think this happens too, just because sometimes sin will, you plant seeds of sin, then there's a harvest that that comes up, and this is him reaping this, even though God is still graceful and still blessing him. But I think also God may have God has allow some of these things to happen. And I think that God allows this to happen because he wants Jacob to experience what it feels like to be on the receiving end of deception and to see what the type of pain is involved in it. Because remember, he's important and he's got to learn what it means to be honorable so he can no longer do this type of thing. But again, I still think that Jacob, this is just what he did before coming back to haunt him later. But what ends up happening is we have Laban. Typically back then it would be dark and the wife would be veiled. And so this is interesting. So Laban is taking advantage of Jacob being in the dark and the woman being veiled to deceive Jacob. And this is in the exact same way that Jacob and Rebekah deceived his father, whose vision was darkened because, he was losing his vision. So we're seeing almost in the exact same deception happen here. And what ends up happening is poor Leah, she's married to this man, and this guy is obviously, Jacob is just mad. And Leah hears this. He's like, I don't want this one. I wanted the other one. What's going on here? And so Laban's like, well, where we live, it's just not customary for the youngest to get married before the eldest. But Laban could have told him that. So Laban, he didn't tell him that because it was possible that Jacob probably would have just moved on. So Laban's he obviously was deceptive. But he tells him, hey, you need to fulfill the week. And what he means by it is like, there's a week of marriage, kind of like a honeymoon. He's like, you need to fulfill your responsibilities, Jacob, because you are married to her now, to Leah, the youngest one. And he's like, and if you work for me another 7 years, you can have Rachel. And so he does just that. Now, we're going to talk about this more. Rachel has a servant, Bilhah, and I think Zilpah is the servant for Leah, and we will see what happens with these servants later. But what ends up happening is it's obvious that Jacob does not love Leah at all. And so what ends up happening is it says God in verse 33, because Yahweh hold on, let's go back a little bit more. Verse 31, Yahweh saw that Leah was hated and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. This is important. This is important because even though, if you're teen, Jacob, whatever, we've got to understand that God cares for everyone. And so God looks at the pains of everyone, even the pains that some of his godly people inflict on others. And God will not sometimes let that go unanswered. And so Leah is obviously hated. I mean, she's hated by Rachel. She's hated by her husband. And so she is now stuck with a man. She's actually the first wife because man is only supposed to be married to one woman. So she's the first wife. And to be honest with you, if Jacob wanted to follow the laws of God and do as God intended, he shouldn't have married Rachel. He should have just said, well, I guess because of deception, I'm just going to have to just be married to Leah. But no, he had to have Rachel. So this creates problems too. So him continuing to go ahead and marry Rachel creates so many issues because as long as he's married to both of these women, it will always be obvious that he prefers one over the other because he's married to both. And Leah, she feels horrible. And so God opens her womb and he gives her all these children, gives her Reuben, gives her Judah, gives her Simeon, and these become important people later. And this is God comforting Leah, because her husband, Jacob, is not. And this is one thing, again, that is not honorable about Jacob, regardless of poor Leah's, regardless of the deception that Laban did, Leah did not deceive him. And I mean, I guess you could say she kind of did, but what choice did she have back then? But She's married to him. She is his wife. And he's not treating her as such. And he's obviously, if he hates her, he's not loving to her. And it's interesting, after each subsequent child, each time it's everything she says, it's almost like a cry out to, like, I want my husband to be close to me. Because it says, she said, she conceived again and bore a son and said, because Yahweh has heard that I'm hated, he has therefore given me this son also. So she's still hated even with the second son. And then the next time it says she conceived again and bore a son, said, now this time will my husband be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. And it's just like, my gosh, it's like she is still pining after the attention of her husband. And then she conceives again, and this is when she bears Judah. And then she names him that. She says, this time will I praise Yahweh. And I love the transition here, because the first 3, it's about, I just want my husband. Maybe this time my husband will love me. Maybe this time my husband will love me. And finally, with the 4th one, I will praise Yahweh. I don't know if, I assume that Jacob probably still feels the same way about Leah as he did before, as he did with the second child, the third child. But in the 4th time, she's like, I'm just going to praise Yahweh, because see, Yahweh is your comforter. And sometimes you will feel like you're missing out. And we've talked about this before, that sometimes you know that you're in the right and you deserve something. But sometimes we have to let things go, and we have to just praise Yahweh. Let things go and praise Yahweh, regardless of the circumstances. And that's when we can get some peace. But I will tell you that there will not be peace in this family. We will see children being born. We're going to see, people giving their servant as like Hagar to keep having babies, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you're just you will see chaos in this family. But I want us to think, even though there seems to be a lot of negative things in this story, but I want you to think of the positives. There's a few of them. God is still there and is with Jacob, regardless of what he's done. And God did transform Jacob, but even though he transformed Jacob, Jacob still had some issues. And then also, God will see your pain, even if no one else sees your pain and you feel like nobody understands, no one sees that I'm in pain, no one sees that I'm ignored, I'm unloved, but God sees. And it is only God sometimes who can fill those voids. Sometimes, as much as we want it, the person that you want to love you the way you need them to love you just won't. And sometimes you just have to rest in the fact that you know that your Savior does. And that's sometimes what we have to deal with. And it's sad, really, because you always want to feel like you can be victorious with certain things. Like you want someone to just love you. But sometimes we have to just realize that sometimes it's God's love that we need. And even if someone does love you, sometimes it's not quite enough or not what you need. God fills those holes that are in your heart, and God will always comfort you. See, God is our comforter. God is our sustainer. And we see this in so many different ways. And it's almost like God is not completely, he doesn't just allow his blessed people just to get things. God even helps others. I mean, we've seen that with Ishmael. I mean, we saw him thrive and have all these children. And the same with Esau. We will see him have lots of children. So God is merciful to people. And even though there are people that aren't necessarily a part of the special family, the special line, you will still see God constantly always looking at other people and still trying to bless them, still caring about people. So our God is love. And see, that's what we're called to do. And regardless of whether or not we think this person's, whether or not we believe, are these people Christians or not, we are called to be loving. We are called to be a blessing. And so even in the case of Jacob, even though he believed that Rachel was the wife that God intended for him, and Leah is just something else, it doesn't matter. He's still called to be a blessing to Leah and to love her and to care for her. And so we sometimes can't get so caught up in what we think is right. See, what was right was for what Jacob believed was right was for him to marry Rachel. But we have to remember that whoever the people God brings into our lives, we want to be able to sow blessings into their lives and not just be a terror in people's lives. See, the thing is, God don't need our help in all of that. Now, we are called to still share God's laws and share the right thing and the wrong things about life, but we're also called to be gracious, to be merciful, and to be loving. So I want to challenge you, be a blessing. Be a blessing to someone, even when you feel like maybe they don't deserve it. Be a blessing. And that's what I leave you with today. You all have a great day. Bye.